Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast with me, your host, Kristy Houle, where we dive into the hottest topics in education. Today, our guest is Elizabeth West, CEO of EWC Consulting, and we're going to be discussing sustainable habits for high school students that will help get them on the right path for college and career. Elizabeth has spent 25 years in education working with students and helping them become successful. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth. I'm so excited that you're here.
Oh my goodness, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Why don't you start by just giving our listeners a little bit of background of your work in this field and kind of how you even got interested in this?
Well, I started in college admissions when I was 21 years old, and I got hired because I was a tour guide at my college. I mean, really, that was my only experience. And so I spent the first 10 years of my career in college admissions. And so I worked my way up to being associate director of admissions and then ultimately director of admissions. So I was starting from going to those high schools, going to the college fairs, to really managing a whole department of doing that. And so then I had kiddos and I didn't want to work. I didn't want to work at night and on weekends. And so I pivoted and I taught for 15 years at our local community college and I taught English. Meanwhile, I was also helping them with transfer admissions during my office hours because I loved admissions. I never wanted to leave it, but it was one of those things where I needed a work-life balance.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, we're going to be talking about sustainable habits, but you just said something that made me sort of switch gears and want to bring up something else. You talked about working with transfer students. And, do you think that part of what we struggle with children of this age that are ready to start thinking about that, or even going into college, are wasting a lot of time because they aren't prepared before they go?
Right. Absolutely. And, I mean, I've been in the business for 25 years. So in higher ed, I have seen so many students that were ill prepared to start college. And then they came back to the community college. And these are students that went to Harvard, Yale, wherever, Chapel Hill. And they come back to the community college and said, I just wasted 1 or 2 years of my time and of my money or my parents' money. And here I am with nothing to show for it. And so it was like, okay, well, we can pivot. This is life. This is what we do. So,
Yeah.
from my own experience as a student, I wanted to be a journalist. And then I got out of college and I couldn't find a journalism job that would make me be able to eat. So basically, the pivoting and really utilizing skills that can be used throughout different
Yeah.
careers, I
Yeah.
think is really important for students.
So, sustainable habits, let's give a little bit of background and substance to those words. When you talk about in your profession, in your consulting business, and all the folks that you talk to, when you talk about sustainable habits, and I'm assuming we're talking about high school age students mostly, what are they? What do we mean when we say sustainable habits? And when should kids really start thinking about this, and administrators and teachers and parents start thinking about getting these sustainable habits going?
Oh, absolutely. And one thing that has really helped me is I think that Atomic Habits by James Clear should be absolute mandatory reading because when you handle these habits, you can't think it's an all or nothing proposition. Basically, you have to celebrate those little victories. So, the three main habits or skills that are sustainable that I see are resilience, time management, and self advocacy. And so, students should be working on these. I teach them to students in ninth grade. If people find me in ninth grade, I'm immediately talking about resilience and time management. Self advocacy is a little bit more of a confidence builder. Like they need a little confidence before they can go and say their teacher, I'm having trouble with this content. Can I get a little not necessarily extra credit, but a little extra time with you. And, so many students are like, I don't want to bother the teacher,
Mhm.
and I don't want to look stupid. And it's like, no, we do this throughout our lives. You have to be your own self advocate. So I think those are the top three. The role as the parent, and I'm a parent to a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. So,
Mhm.
I mean, I'm doing these every day, and it's really hard. Resilience has taken on a far different definition after the pandemic. These children are dealing with mental health issues that we
Mhm.
haven't seen, and directly related to what we all experienced. And so resilience, ah, it's a tough one, because you wanna give tough love, but you also wanna
Mhm.
honor, like, you've been through a tough time. So how do we make that work? I'm still working on that. I don't have the answers to that, but I think that you definitely, I'll give you an example. My son was struggling in an AP class, and he thought maybe I should go down to an honors
Mhm.
class, whatever. And I said, you can do this. You've been in it 2 weeks. Let's take a little perspective and let's see what you need to be successful. Because I believe in you, your dad believes in you. I think we can be successful at this. So, kind of that resilience of, you've got this. Let's think about how well you've got this and what we can do to make you better. Um, but the role of the school, I always think that, these kind of skills, these kind of habits need to be embedded in the curriculum.
Mhm.
And so I taught college, so it was different. Like, I got to design my own curriculum, which is a luxury. I get that. K through 12, you don't have that luxury.
Mhm.
However, let me give you an example about time management. How to reinforce those aspects of time management is, maybe you estimate times for the amount of homework that they're going to have. So, I'm going to give you this assignment. It should probably take you about an hour. If it takes you longer, that's fine. If it takes you shorter, fine. But I think that when you talk about time management, students don't have the capability of estimating the amount of time things should take them.
Mhm.
So that's just an example of schools.
Mhm. Yeah. And so as you're talking, I have so many things going through my mind because I'm thinking about, the school settings that I'm in and the folks that I talk to and their frustration. But I have two children still in the home that are going to be needing all these things. I have a freshman, and it's funny because he actually met, and I'm doing the air quotes. He met with his counselor. He had a counselor visit, and we went over his schedule, and and it was the same conversations, right? It was, you have to advocate for yourself. If because he feels like at this point he knows exactly what track he wants to be on. He knows exactly where he wants to go and what he wants to do as a freshman, but he doesn't have that self advocacy. He's exactly the kid that you described, where he doesn't want to speak up for himself. And I'm like, now don't forget to say this, and you have to say this, and you have to say this. And I think that's a struggle with, one, the time. You brought up time management, but I also think, in the curriculum, that teachers and administrators and counselors sometimes don't even have time to have those conversations either.
I know.
And so, do you find that in your work that you do, that folks are coming to you saying, I want to have conversations with these high school kids. I want to do these things, but I just don't have time in my day with everything else that the school district or is asking me to do.
I think the whole world of education, and especially K through 12 education, you have impossible volumes. You have impossible out, expectations. And so when you get to, like, the sheer volume of students, now we live in a highly populated area in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I mean, this is nationwide. You're looking at school counselors, 400 some odd students to one counselor. And those counselors are dealing with mental health issues, they're dealing with registration issues. And oh, by the way, you are charged with college prep. And that's an impossible job. That is absolutely not tenable. So, what do we do for these schools and these school counselors? I definitely want to be an advocate for them. And ultimately, I want my business to have a nonprofit arm and
Mm,
to be able to give these services, give these away for free. I mean,
mhm.
that's where I'm going with this. I want to be successful in one area, putting food on the table, but then
Yeah.
also giving back, because that's I've only worked for state universities and community colleges. That's all I know, is that
Mhm,
working with this population that doesn't necessarily have the funds
mhm.
to afford somebody like me.
Yeah. Well, okay, so I'm glad that you brought that up, because I had written down as we were speaking the difference, and this is for the teachers listening and the counselors listening and the administrators that I know are listening to this, and they're sitting there listening to you and saying, "Yeah, Elizabeth, that sounds great, but I don't have the time, I don't have the money." And our demographic of student, right? So for those folks that are working in a low socioeconomic demographic, where they're dealing with poverty, where they're dealing with crime, where they're dealing with those types of things, and then the students are bringing a lot of that to the school with them, where do you think this ranks on the priority? And do you think that sometimes it takes a back seat in a high school in that type of demographic, as opposed to a high school in a higher socioeconomic, less poverty? Does that take a back seat to those kids, unfortunately?
Well, it's interesting because I always wonder that. I
Mhm.
absolutely, that's one of the main things that I try to research. And there is a new documentary out on HBO called My So-Called High School Rank. And it showcases students in Orange County, California. And this is
Mhm,
top of the
mhm.
top. And then students in West Virginia in a very low socioeconomic level. And the fears on college prep are the same,
Yeah.
that they are worried about prestige, they're worried about scholarships. I mean, these students that are quite wealthy are still worried about scholarships. And so these are the common areas. Prestige, scholarships, and am I going to have a good career after graduation? And so, I think that there is a voice for people who are doing college prep and who are advocating for these students and saying, we're all in this together, really. We come at it from different angles, but the fears are real.
Mhm,
And I am trying to flip the script and say, there's not we need to be positive, and we need to show your passion. And the fears, you're going to be afraid of finding your first job. There are lots of fears in life, but I think that there is a real connection to making this fear real for these students. And I want to break that. Let's get them excited about college rather than, will they want me? And, oh, what if I don't
mhm,
get in here and it's destroyed my life?
mhm,
That's got to stop. It's just got
mhm.
to stop.
So more support, more encouragement. So that leads me to this question, and I'm going to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit here, because I've actually, and I'll use just a personal story. I'm dealing with this with one of my children. What do you do, and how do you speak to students that they come into you, or they come into their parent or their high school teacher or their counselor, whoever they're talking to, and their goal is something that is potentially unreachable or unattainable, because it's just something, everybody wants to be a star athlete, everybody wants to be a YouTube star, everybody wants to be a celebrity, everybody wants to go to the best college in the world or be at the top of their field right away, right? Because I think we're dealing with the generation of instant gratification of children. Just speaking of my own children, like they want things to happen
Me
quickly.
too. I'm very honest. I mean, I think that that comes from me being a teacher and, really saying, I had to, people failed my classes sometimes, and I had to be like, this is what's happening. So I
Mhm,
think that when you look at college and when you look at the predicting if they'll get in or not, I think that what's really important is that we start with the students knowing themselves. The self-awareness piece is so important to the college search process. So what we do at EWC is we start out, what are you good at? what do you like to do? And then we give them some assessments that we basically try to see through data, personality, multiple intelligences. I'm endlessly curious about students because there are no two students alike, and they all have very interesting talents and passions. Now, when their talent and their passion don't align, that's when we have a conversation. I
Mm-hmm.
had a student that wanted to go into fashion, and she was 100% I'm going into fashion. But STEM was like lighting up like a Christmas tree on all of her assessments. And so we worked together to figure out how can fashion and STEM come together
Mm-hmm.
to maximize your talents, but to honor that passion that you have. And so that's where I like to manage expectations, but I am very clear when a student wants to get into an elite college that admits 8%
Yeah.
of their applicants. I'm like, "Oh, it's a reach. And
Mm-hmm.
I will never tell you not to apply, but we have to be realistic about it. So let's have like five other options that are more attainable."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that happens for a lot of students. They see things, they're so into social media and TikTok and all these things where they're seeing these universities and these, prestigious colleges and universities. And my son has mentioned a few colleges, and I'm like, oh gosh, you have to have a GPA like of 3.8 to even be considered, to even write a letter, to even be thought of, and so because he so desperately wants to go to a school like that, he is really working in ninth grade. I'm like, you have to start now.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
can't
yeah,
wait. And I
absolutely.
think so that kind of brings me to my next question for you. What are some things that you think are vital that students are missing and then it's too late?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. So what I see is that students, when colleges are looking at an applicant, and I did this a million times. Basically, you're looking at the course choice and what was available at your high school and your GPA that you got in that high school. What I'm seeing a lot in our area, and this may be nationwide as well, is that students are opting to take very kind of boutique courses or
Mhm.
specialty courses in like entrepreneurship, which is a great course, but you cannot opt to take a specialty course and opt out of like a natural science or opt out of a core course. There are five core courses: English, math, science, social science, and world languages. And
Mhm.
when students opt out of one of those five to take health science courses or something like that, I get it. I really wish it weren't like this, but it is like this. When you look at admissions, they basically ignore those boutique classes and they are looking at what have you done in those core courses and how is that going to prepare you to be successful at our college. So that's one of the major things that I see that I've had to sort of reconnoiter people because in ninth and 10th grade they took a lot of these classes that are great if you are headed to the community college. They are
Mhm.
very workforce development oriented. But when you're talking about trying to get into these elite colleges and universities, stick to the classics, stick to the core, and do really well in those core courses.
Mhm. Yeah. And so you brought up community college. We've talked a lot about, a four-year university, and I want to throw in a career path, whether it's a vocational career, a trade, maybe just learning something on your own, because a lot of folks are now learning online, whether it's editing or something to do with computer skills, where you may not even need a degree anymore. You just need to actually have the technical skill to do the job. So thinking about those three different paths that a student can take once they graduate high school, are the habits the same? Do we still want to focus on those three main self-advocacy, time management, and resilience habits? Or how does that change depending on if you have one kiddo that says, oh, I want to go to Ohio State and play professional football, and then you have a student that says, I really want to work on heating and cooling systems?
Yeah. the beauty of these habits are that they're not only sustainable throughout high school, but throughout your career, throughout parenting, throughout everything that you do. So they really live for students. When you talk about resilience, unfortunately, there are people that go through divorce, that go through death, that go through all of these life changing things, and you need those skills of resilience. For time management, holy mackerel, I'm still trying to live with that.
Mm-hmm.
And self advocacy. So I think that whether you go into a trade or whether you go into a 4-year college, these are sustainable skills that you will learn and use. HVAC. When you go into an HVAC career, I had lots of students go into HVAC, which is heating and cooling. Talk about time management. Talk about business acumen. When you have customers, you have to figure out how long is it going to take to fix this unit that I'm working on. And so it's really a gift to yourself that keeps giving.
Yeah. Yeah. What about those students that sort of get pigeonholed, right? Like I have a kiddo that's like, this is what I'm going to do. And my husband tries to give him good advice on maybe you should do this and maybe you should do this over the summer to help you. He's like, nope, I got my plan. I'm not changing it. This is what I think I want to do. Is there a way to kind of sort of nudge them maybe to a different route or a different thing, even if it's the preparation to get where they want to go? Because, a lot of times kids are like, nope, especially, teenagers, 14, 15, they know everything.
Right.
We know nothing.
Right. Oh
Right.
gosh. I could write a book about that alone.
Maybe we should.
That'd be great.
We go from like the smartest people in the world to the dumbest people in the world. And then it does circle back around. I can tell you, because I have a 19-year-old who does now think that we are like the smartest parents and he gets it, but it does circle back. So there's hope.
Well, that's wonderful to hear.
But how do you kind of nudge those kiddos at that age? Because it's a developmentally difficult age for kids as well. Like they're trying to figure out who they are. They're transitioning into high school. They're trying to figure out where they belong, who they are, what they like, all while trying to figure out what they might want to do in 4 years.
I think you're absolutely on the right path where try it out. You want to do that? Let's see if we can find an internship. Let's see if we can look at the U.S. Department of Labor statistics for, is the outlook good? You don't want to go into a career where the outlook is in the tank for the next 10 to 20 years. I also think that there's a piece of that where if it comes from the parent, they're not going to believe it. And, I hear it all the time with my own kids. They talk about college and so-and-so's parent said this about this school. And I'm like, I do this for a living. Like, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about my career now. And so I think that it might take some data to move them. My son's very literal. And so I have to like move him with actual numbers and actual data. My daughter, she's like, what kind of lifestyle am I going to have? So I need to so I think that you meet the student where they are, but I also think it's important to sort of give them a glimpse into what their future will look like given this career.
Wow, that's really smart. I mean, I have really never thought about sitting, a student down and saying, I know this is what you want to do, but let's look at the research on after 5 years in that career, what would that look like for you? After 10 years, what is the outlook? Wow, that's great. Thank you for that. So yeah, I'm sure my listeners are like, oh, I haven't thought about that, because we too are thinking like right now, right?
Right.
As a teacher and a counselor and someone working in the school system, you're thinking about how do I get this child to the next step?
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
That's your job. You're not looking at 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road. As a parent, you're probably looking at, what is this going to cost me? How am I going to get them there the easiest with the least amount of disappointment? And is their life going to be full? So that's really, really great advice. Let's kind of switch over a little bit, because I know that we do have a group of our audience are homeschool families. And I know a lot of times homeschool families that are not in the traditional brick and mortar public K through 12 school with the counselors and the transcripts and, all of these things at hand have a difficult time not only knowing what to work on with their child, but how to actually get them from finishing the workload at home and then getting into a career path without all of that documentation from a school. So what advice would you give homeschool families?
I think there are homeschool families in our area that have really solid networks. And I think that you lean on the network that you have and invite people like me to come to talk to you because um, if people are of quality, they will not charge you to come talk to you about college prep. And when I think about I haven't had any homeschooled clients, but I worked with homeschool students when I was at the community college. And I've got to tell you, they were some of my best students. I
Hmm.
mean, just wonderful. And I get that they didn't understand where these resources were and how they could get to them. So I think the first thing would be to maybe reach out to the local high school. But again, we're talking about school counselors that are inundated
Yeah.
with 400 plus students. So reach out to people like me, and I am absolutely happy to talk to homeschool groups and see if we can partner or um, make some resources available because
Mhm.
no one should feel like they're isolated when it comes to college prep.
I want to ask you, do you have students that come back or that you work with that have either been in a career or went to a school or done things that they thought they wanted to do? And they come back and say, I wish I would have known. I had no idea. Like, and they're super surprised by something that they've had to do or, something that's happened to them. Like, what are some good stories or some things that are coming back to you and kids saying, man, I wish I would have known this?
It's funny because I think of college as like a 4-year incubation period of going from teenager to adult.
Hmm.
And I see it in my students that have only done 1 year or one semester of college. And the growth is exponential when you talk about them virtually living on their own. Um, but I think that one of the number one things that I've seen in terms of a stumbling block, maybe
Hmm.
communication. When you communicate to your professor, when you communicate to your boss, it's not the same way you communicate to your friends. So, I mean, starting an email like, hey, doctor, whoever, and it's like, I mean, I would chuckle and I thought it was funny. And I'm not a doctor. So, I mean, I thought that was hilarious. But then you get some people that are like, "Who are you to speak to me like that?"
Hmm.
And it breaks the connection immediately, and you didn't even mean to, you didn't even know. So, I like to work about discourse communities with my students, and that's from being an English teacher, I know. But basically saying, "This is how you conduct your communication with these people, and this is
Hmm.
how you conduct it." So, you have to kind of be adept at talking to all sorts of different people in the way that they want to be addressed.
So, do you think that a good strategy for that then is just really having students practice that skill and email their teachers and email when they miss a day instead of the parent doing it for them and all of those things? I mean, is that a good strategy?
Yes, and that's self-advocacy right there. I mean, you're killing 2 birds with 1
Look at
stone.
that. And if I do it really
Yay!
fast, I've got time management, I've got resilience if I don't get offended. Look at that. I just wrapped them all in one.
I love
Okay,
that.
so tell our listeners where they can reach out to you, where they can, because I'm sure there's some people right now listening thinking, I really could use some help. And this all sounds exactly like what I need. So, how can they get in touch with you? Where can we find you?
Sure, I can help students nationwide, and our business is called EWC Consulting, College Consulting, and, my website is N as in Nancy, C, EWC.com. They'll find out all of the information about our background and, all of that, and there's an actual contact page where you can contact, and it'll go right to our executive assistant,
Mhm.
and we'll help you out.
Yeah. Do you do things virtual as well, or is it mostly in person?
I taught online for 10 years,
Oh,
so
perfect.
I'm very fine with doing virtual. I have students meet me in person, so it doesn't matter. I can do both.
Yeah. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much. It has been such a fun conversation and really full of important information that I think sometimes we just don't think, we forget about it, and it's really important. So, thank you. It has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you. I've loved it. Thank
Yeah,
you
it's been
very
fun.
much.
And thank you to everyone that listened. And once again, this is Kristy Houle signing off for this episode of the Classroom Matters podcast.